King Victor of Eldoria, Lord of the Crimson Throne, and master of 1,000 years, was tired. It was a weariness that settled not in his ancient bones, which were as strong as the mountain stone of his castle, but in his soul. For centuries, he had navigated the treacherous currents of courtly life, a ceaseless ballet of ambition, flattery, and thinly veiled contempt. The noble houses, with their silken words and poisoned daggers, saw him not as a guardian of the realm, but as a prize to be won, a power to be manipulated through a strategic marriage. Each presented their daughters like polished jewels, their virtues recited like pedigrees, their eyes holding the cold gleam of their father's ambitions. Victor saw through it all. He saw the calculation, the hunger for the crown, and in all their perfect practiced smiles, he never once saw a flicker of genuine warmth for the man who wore it. His loneliness was a vast, quiet country of which he was the sole inhabitant. He had ruled with justice and strength, but he had ruled alone, the immortality that set him apart also serving as an insurmountable wall between him and the fleeting warmth of true companionship. He yearned for a connection that was not transactional, for a heart that would see past the vampire king to the man who loved poetry and watched the dawn paint the sky in hues he could no longer walk in. And so, he had made a decree. It was born of desperation and a sliver of ancient hope, a legend whispered in the castle's oldest corridors. In the center of the great hall, upon a dais of black marble, rested the sword of the first king, Nightfall. Forged in the heart of a fallen star, its hilt was wrapped in silver wire, and its pommel was a single, unblinking ruby. The blade itself was the color of a moonless midnight, and it was plunged to the hilt in a block of granite taken from the mountain's peak. Legend claimed that Nightfall could not be wielded by strength or right of birth, but only by a hand guided by a true and noble heart, a character unburdened by greed or malice. The ancient texts were clear. The sword did not respond to conscious intention or desire, for such attempts were inevitably tainted by ambition. It would only answer to a soul reaching out with complete purity of purpose, untainted by thought of reward. For 500 years, it had not moved. Victor's decree was simple, and to his court, utterly mad. "I shall wed the one who draws nightfall from the stone," he had announced, his voice echoing in the stunned silence of the throne room. "Be they noble or commoner, man or woman, their heart shall be my kingdom's greatest treasure, and they shall be my equal on this throne." The nobles had been aghast, then avaricious. The proclamation was an insult to their bloodlines, yet it was also an opportunity. They descended upon the great hall like vultures to a feast. Lord Valerius, whose chest was puffed with pride and whose ancestors had supposedly wrestled dragons, was first. He wrapped his meaty fists around the hilt, his face turning a blotchy purple as he strained. The sword did not budge. He tried again, roaring with effort until his knuckles were white, but Nightfall remained as fixed as the mountain itself. He stalked away, muttering curses about dark magic. Lady Seraphina, famed for her ethereal beauty and cunning mind, tried a different approach. She traced the silver wire of the hilt with a delicate finger, whispering words of sweet persuasion as if to a lover. The sword remained cold and inert, indifferent to her charms. One by one, they came. Knights renowned for their valor, duchesses of impeccable lineage, clever ministers, and wealthy merchants. They pulled, they heaved, they prayed, they commanded. Some tried to use levers and ropes, only to find them snap uselessly. The stone and the sword were one, a silent testament to the emptiness of their claims. Days turned into weeks, and the dais became a monument to frustrated ambition. Victor watched from his throne, a familiar weariness settling over him once more. Perhaps, he thought, such a heart no longer existed in this world. Perhaps he was destined to remain alone. The annual summer tournament was a grand affair, a rare occasion when the castle grounds were thrown open and the drudgery of court life was replaced with the thrill of the joust. Brightly colored pavilions dotted the greens, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and summer wine. Victor presided over the festivities with a practiced air of regal detachment, his gaze distant. He had commanded nightfall and its stone to be moved to the tournament grounds, a centerpiece of grim mockery amidst the celebration. It was a reminder of his foolish, hopeful decree, and with every passing hour, it felt more like a tombstone for his own heart. Alice worked in the scullery, a world away from the silks and pennants of the tournament. She was 28 years old, and the castle kitchens had been her only family since her mother's death 13 years prior. Her days were a rhythm of steam and scrubbing, her hands perpetually chapped from lye soap and hot water. Yet she did not mind the work. There was a simple honesty to it, a satisfaction in seeing a stack of pewter plates gleam under her care. She was quiet and observant, a small, unassuming shadow moving through the castle's underbelly. Sometimes, from a high window in a corridor she was polishing, she would catch a glimpse of the king. She saw not the fearsome vampire lord of the stories, but a figure of profound solitude. She saw the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching, the deep sadness in his eyes as he gazed out over his kingdom. Her heart, in its simple kindness, ached for him. Today, she had been given a task that filled her with a quiet dread, serving wine to the nobles in the royal pavilion. Her best woolen dress had been carefully mended, and her hair was tied back with a simple ribbon. Holding a heavy silver tray, laden with crystal goblets, she navigated the throng of richly dressed lords and ladies. Their laughter was loud, their voices sharp and dismissive. Alice kept her eyes down, her focus entirely on the precarious balance of the tray. She felt as out of place as a field mouse in a lion's den. She approached the dais where the king sat, her heart thrumming a nervous beat against her ribs. Lord Valerius, still smarting from his failure with the sword, made a grand sweeping gesture while telling a boisterous story. His arm knocked into a passing courtier, who stumbled backward directly into Alice's path. Her world tilted. The heavy tray pitched forward, goblets sliding. A small cry escaped her lips as she lost her footing on the slick grass. She flailed, her arms pinwheeling for something, anything, to catch herself. Her left hand, desperate and unthinking, closed around the cool, solid shape of the sword's hilt. It was not a conscious act. It was the instinct of a falling person reaching for purchase, her mind filled only with the panic of descent, no thought whatsoever of the legendary blade or its power. For a heartbeat, the hilt of nightfall was simply an anchor in a moment of chaos. She expected resistance, the unyielding solidity of the stone. Instead, she felt a smooth, shocking release. The world went silent. The boisterous laughter died. The clang of steel from the jousting lists faded into nothing. Alice, halfway to the ground, found herself holding the sword. It had slid from the granite with the soundless grace of a sigh. The blade, a sliver of pure midnight, was free. And then it began to glow. A soft, crimson light pulsed from within the dark steel, bathing Alice's stunned face in its warm radiance. The ruby on the pommel throbbed like a living heart, its light a mirror of the soft glow that now emanated from the blade. Alice stared at the impossible object in her hand, her mind a complete blank. The tray and its shattered crystal lay forgotten at her feet. She was on her knees on the grass, holding a legendary sword that had not been seen by mortal eyes in half a millennium. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. Then the gasp turned into a murmur, and the murmur swelled into a roar of disbelief and outrage. "A scullery maid?" Lord Valerius bellowed, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "It's a trick, a deception. She must have bewitched it," Lady Seraphina accused, her voice a venomous hiss. "The king is being played for a fool." The accusations flew, a storm of indignation from the assembled nobility. They could not accept it. They would not accept it. The idea that this slip of a girl, this nobody with chapped hands and a mended dress, possessed a worthier heart than any of them was an intolerable insult. Alice shrank under the weight of their fury, her body trembling uncontrollably. She wanted to drop the sword, to run, to disappear back into the comforting anonymity of her kitchens. The crimson light of the blade seemed to burn her skin, marking her, exposing her. She looked up, her terrified eyes searching for an escape, and met the gaze of the king. Victor had risen from his throne. The clamor of the court faded into a dull roar at the edge of his senses. He saw only the girl on her knees, bathed in the light of the sword, her face pale with terror. For the first time in a century, a genuine, unfeigned emotion cracked through his mask of regal indifference. It was not amusement. It was not satisfaction. It was a profound, soul-shaking wave of hope, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. After centuries of posturing and ambition, after an endless parade of hearts as cold and hard as the granite that had held this blade, here was the truth. It had come not in silks and jewels, but in humble wool and quiet terror. He felt a smile touch his lips, a true smile that reached his ancient eyes and filled them with a light no one had seen in living memory. The court fell silent as he descended the steps of the dais, his movements fluid and deliberate. He walked not like a king approaching a subject, but like a man approaching a miracle. The nobles parted before him, their outrage momentarily quelled by the sheer force of his presence and the utter sincerity of his expression. He stopped before Alice. The crimson glow of nightfall illuminated the tear tracks on her cheeks and the frantic pulse beating in her throat. She was trembling so hard the sword quivered in her grasp. Victor's heart, a thing he had long thought dormant, ached with a protective tenderness. He wanted to shield her from the venomous stares, to quiet her fear. Slowly, he reached out, his hands moving with infinite gentleness. He did not reach for the sword. He reached for her. His cool, strong fingers closed over her small, trembling ones, which were still clenched around the hilt. His touch was not a demand, but a comfort. It was steady and warm in a way she never would have expected. "It is all right," he said, his voice a low, soothing murmur meant only for her. It was not the commanding tone of a king, but the soft reassurance of a man. Alice flinched, her eyes wide with panic. "Your Majesty, I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I tripped. I was just trying to stop myself from falling." Her words tumbled out in a panicked rush. "Please, I can put it back. I don't want it. I don't want anything. She tried to pull her hands away, to push the sword back toward the stone, but it was like trying to push a feather back into a bird. It had chosen to be free. An accident, Victor repeated softly, his gaze never leaving her face. He saw the genuine panic in her eyes, the complete lack of ambition or guile. She was not trying to win a crown. She was trying to apologize for breaking a dish. And in that moment, he knew the sword had made no mistake. Some would call it destiny, he added, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. Nightfall has never responded to intention, to those who reached for it wanting something. Every noble who grasped its hilt did so with ambition in their hearts, with desire for power or position. You simply were, reaching for stability with no thought of reward or recognition. That purity, that absolute lack of self-interest, is what the sword has waited 5 centuries to recognize. No, she whispered, shaking her head, tears welling anew. No, I am a scullery maid. I am no one. This is a mistake. Your Majesty, you cannot possibly... The decree. She trailed off, unable to even voice the impossible conclusion. The decree was for a true heart, Victor said, his voice firm but gentle. Nightfall has made its choice, and I will honor it. He saw the absolute terror that bloomed in her eyes at his words. She was not just refusing the honor, she was terrified of it. She was terrified of him. And that, more than anything, told him he had to do this right. With a grace that stunned the watching court, King Victor of Eldoria, the immortal ruler, sank to one knee before the scullery maid. He was still holding her hands, his gaze lifted to hers. He was not a king commanding a subject. He was a man, vulnerable and hopeful, before the woman who held his future in her trembling grasp. My name is Victor, he said, his voice clear and resonant in the heavy silence. Not your Majesty, not to you. He looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing past the mended dress to the terrified, honest soul within. I am bound by my own decree, it is true, but I will not command you. I will not force you. I ask you, Alice. He had heard her name whispered by a frantic servant in the aftermath. I ask you not to be my subject, but to be my equal. I ask you to consider sharing a life with me, a man who has been alone for a very, very long time. Will you allow me the chance to prove myself worthy of the heart that this sword has already recognized? The court held its breath. This was not how power worked. A king did not kneel. A king did not ask. He commanded. But Victor was doing something far more revolutionary. He was offering not his crown, but himself. He was ceding his power, offering a partnership, a true union. He was giving her a choice, a courtesy none of the noble ladies had ever been afforded. Alice stared down at him, at the ancient powerful king kneeling in the grass at her feet. She saw the sincerity in his dark eyes, the raw vulnerability in his plea. The fear in her heart did not vanish, but something else began to bloom beside it, a fragile, tentative shoot of wonder. He was not the monster of the stories. He was the lonely man she had seen in the window. And he was asking. He was truly asking. After a lifetime of taking orders, of being invisible, someone was finally asking what she wanted. Her trembling slowly subsided, steadied by the firm warmth of his hands. The crimson glow of the sword softened, casting a gentle light on them both, a silent, knowing benediction. She took a breath, the first steady one she had taken since she'd stumbled. And in the breathless silence of the entire kingdom, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The weeks that followed were a strange and bewildering dream for Alice. She was moved from the cramped servants' quarters to a suite of rooms in the royal wing of the castle. The chambers were larger than the entire scullery, with a soft feather bed, windows that overlooked the royal gardens, and a wardrobe filled with beautiful, simple gowns of soft wool and linen in shades of moss green and sky blue. Ladies in waiting, women who had once looked through her as if she were made of glass, now attended her, their faces a mixture of resentment and grudging respect. Alice found their constant presence stifling. She missed the simple solitude of her work, the familiar weight of a scrubbing brush in her hand. Victor seemed to understand this without her needing to say a word. He dismissed the attendants whenever he came to see her, creating a quiet space where they could simply be a man and a woman, stripped of the suffocating layers of rank and expectation. Their courtship was not a public spectacle, but a series of private, carefully tended moments. It began with their first dinner together. Alice had been terrified, expecting a grand banquet with dozens of disapproving nobles. Instead, Victor led her to a small, secluded alcove in the library, where a table for two had been set near a crackling fire. Shelves, filled with ancient books, rose to the ceiling around them, the air smelling of old paper and wood smoke. It was the coziest room she had ever seen. "I thought this might be more comfortable than the great hall," Victor said, pulling out a chair for her. His formality was ingrained, but there was a new softness in his actions, a careful consideration. Alice sat, her hands clenched in her lap. She felt clumsy and out of place, certain she would use the wrong fork or spill her wine. She watched as Victor served the soup himself, a simple, hearty vegetable broth that smelled wonderfully familiar. It was the same recipe the castle cooks made for the staff on cold nights. He saw her look of surprise. "I asked Cook Elspeth what you liked," he explained, a faint hint of a smile on his lips. I hope she was correct. That small act of thoughtfulness did more to put Alice at ease than any grand gesture could have. It was a sign that he saw her, Alice, the girl who liked vegetable soup, not just the abstract figure who had drawn the sword. Timidly, she picked up her spoon. For a long while, they ate in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft clink of silver on porcelain. It was Victor who spoke first. "Tell me about your life in the scullery," he asked, his tone one of genuine curiosity. "I realize I know nothing of the world that exists beneath my own floors." Alice hesitated, then began to speak. She told him not of hardship, but of the small things, of the camaraderie with the other maids, of the satisfaction of a well-scrubbed pot, of the way the morning sun streamed into the kitchens in the early hours. She spoke of her mother, who had taught her to find joy in simple work and a kind word before her death 13 years ago. As she spoke, she forgot to be nervous. She was simply talking, and he was simply listening, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel as though she were the only person in the world. He, in turn, told her not of battles and politics, but of the books that surrounded them. He spoke of ancient poets who wrote of starlight and loss, of historians who chronicled forgotten kingdoms. He confessed that he often spent the long, lonely hours before dawn in this very room, finding more companionship in the pages of a book than in his own court. A picture began to form in Alice's mind of a man starved for genuine connection, a scholar and a poet trapped inside the body of a king. The dinner stretched for hours, but it felt like mere minutes. When he walked her back to her chambers, he paused at the door. "Thank you, Alice," he said, his voice quiet. "It has been a very long time since I have enjoyed a meal so much." He made no move to touch her, offering only a small, formal bow before he left. Alice lay in her enormous feather bed that night, sleep a distant country. She thought of the king, of Victor. She thought of the way his eyes softened when he spoke of poetry, the way he'd listened to her simple stories with such rapt attention. The fear was still there, a nervous flutter in her stomach, but it was now mingled with a burgeoning curiosity, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the library. She was beginning to see the man behind the crown, and he was nothing like she had expected. Their evenings in the library became a ritual. Each night, a simple meal, followed by hours of conversation. He learned that she had a quick, surprisingly sharp wit, and she discovered he had a dry sense of humor that rarely made an appearance in the throne room. But Victor also recognized that Alice would need more than just his affection to survive the court. On their fifth evening together, he presented her with a proposal. "Alice, I would like to arrange some instruction for you. Not because I doubt your capabilities, but because the nobles will look for any reason to undermine you. I want you to have every advantage." Alice's first instinct was embarrassment, but she saw only concern in his eyes, not condescension. "What kind of instruction?" she asked quietly. "The head librarian, Master Cornelius, can teach you the history of Eldoria and our neighboring kingdoms. Lady Seraphina has agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to instruct you in courtly etiquette and protocol." He paused, seeing Alice's look of surprise. "I made it clear to Lady Seraphina that her cooperation would be remembered, as would any treachery. She is ambitious enough to choose the winning side." He took Alice's hand gently. "And I will teach you myself about the policies and governance of the realm, but only if you wish it. This is your choice." Alice considered his words. The thought of learning intimidated her, but she also felt a spark of excitement. "I want to be a true partner to you," she said softly, "not a burden you must carry." "Yes, I wish it." Victor's smile was radiant. "You could never be a burden." And so, Alice's days became full in a new way. Mornings were spent with Master Cornelius in the library, absorbing the complex history of trade agreements, ancient feuds, and political alliances. The old scholar was patient and kind, never making her feel foolish for her questions. Afternoons brought Lady Seraphina, whose instruction was thorough if coolly delivered. Alice learned which fork to use, how to curtsy to visiting dignitaries, and the subtle language of fans and glances that noble women employed. She found it ridiculous, but understood its importance. Evenings remained hers, and Victor's alone, and those were the hours she treasured most. One evening, he read to her from a book of old fairy tales, his voice a deep melodic baritone that made the magical words shimmer in the air. Alice found herself leaning forward, captivated not just by the story, but by the gentle rise and fall of his voice. He looked up and caught her gaze, and for a long moment the world seemed to shrink to the space between them, a space charged with a quiet, unspoken energy. Victor felt his heart, that slow and steady organ, beat a little faster. He had read these stories 100 times, but they had never felt so real, so full of possibility, as they did when he shared them with her. As he set the book aside, Alice surprised him with a question. "Victor, may I ask you something about your nature?" He stiffened slightly, uncertain what she meant, but he nodded. "You've lived 1,000 years," she said, her voice tentative. "You've experienced so much, known so many people. What could you possibly see in me? I'm just beginning to understand the world you inhabit." It was the question he had been waiting for, the one he knew she would eventually ask. He set down his wine glass and turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Alice, those 1,000 years have taught me something precious. Experience without connection is merely existence. I have watched empires rise and fall, but I've never truly lived until I met someone who saw me. Not my crown, or my power, or even my immortality, but simply me. You ground me. You remind me what matters. Your perspective is not a deficit. It is a gift. You see the world with fresh eyes, with compassion uncorrupted by centuries of cynicism. That is what I see in you." Tears gathered in Alice's eyes at the raw honesty in his words. She squeezed his hands, and they sat in comfortable silence, the intimacy of the moment needing no further words. A week into their courtship, he invited her to walk in the moonlit gardens. The air was cool and smelled of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth. Victor offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Alice placed her hand on his sleeve. The fine velvet was soft beneath her fingers, and she could feel the solid strength of his arm beneath it. It was the first time they had touched since that chaotic day at the tournament, and the simple contact sent a jolt of warmth through her. They walked along the gravel paths, their footsteps the only sound in the sleeping garden. The moonlight silvered the leaves of the ancient oaks and cast long shadows that danced around them. "I have walked these paths alone for centuries," Victor said, his voice a low murmur in the darkness. "It is different with you here." "Is it a good different?" Alice asked, her voice barely a whisper. He stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious in the pale moonlight. "It is the best kind of different," he said. He looked up at the sky, a vast expanse of velvet pricked with diamond dust stars. "Immortality is a strange gift, Alice. You watch the world change. You watch people fade, friends, companions. They are like seasons, coming and going, while you remain. After a time, you learn not to get too close. It is a lonely way to exist." It was the most vulnerable thing he had ever said, a confession of the deep, aching wound at the heart of his existence. Alice's heart went out to him. She could not imagine such a life, a loneliness so profound it stretched across ages. Impulsively, her fingers tightened on his arm. "You are not alone now," she said softly. Victor looked down at her, at the sincere compassion shining in her eyes. No one had ever offered him such simple, unadorned comfort. They were not words of flattery or pity, but a statement of fact, offered with a quiet strength that moved him deeply. He felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to brush a stray curl of hair from her cheek, to feel the warmth of her skin. The scent of her, warm and alive and human, was intoxicating. He could hear the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, a sound that called to the predator within him, yet he felt no hunger, only a profound desire to protect. But he held back from more intimate touch. It was too soon. He would not rush this. He would not frighten her. He would earn her trust, her affection, one quiet moment at a time. Instead, he simply covered her hand with his own. His fingers were cool, but there was a current of energy in his touch that was anything but. It was protective, possessive, and infinitely tender all at once. "No," he agreed. his voice thick with an emotion he could not name. I am not. They stood there for a long time, hand in hand, bathed in the silent silver of the moon. Victor closed his eyes for just a moment, centering himself, controlling the surge of vampiric awareness that her closeness provoked. When he opened them again, his gaze was clear and full of gentle affection. The great sprawling castle loomed behind them, but in the quiet intimacy of the garden, it felt a world away. There was no king and no scullery maid. There were only Victor and Alice, two lonely souls who had found, in the most unexpected of ways, a flicker of light in each other's darkness. And as they began to walk again, their hands still joined, Alice realized that the nervous flutter in her stomach had transformed. It was no longer the flutter of fear. It was the flutter of hope. The castle kitchens, once Alice's entire world, now felt like a place from another life. Yet she found herself drawn back to their familiar warmth and chaos. It was a haven from the whispering nobles and the heavy silence of her grand chambers, a respite from the intense hours of study with Master Cornelius and the awkward lessons with Lady Seraphina. One afternoon, she found cook Elspeth kneading a massive mound of bread dough on a flowered wooden table. The older woman, whose stern face hid a kind heart, gave Alice a rare, soft smile. "Missing the feel of flour on your hands, little bird?" Elspeth asked, her own arms dusted white to the elbows. Alice smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile. "More than you know." She picked up an apron from a nearby hook and tied it around her waist over her simple blue gown. Without a word, Elspeth carved off a piece of the dough for her. For the next hour, Alice worked alongside the cook, her hands moving with practiced ease, kneading and shaping the dough into small, round loaves. The familiar, rhythmic work was a balm to her soul. She felt grounded. She felt like herself. She was so absorbed in her task, a light dusting of flour on her nose and cheek, that she didn't hear him approach. A shadow fell over the table, and she looked up to see Victor standing in the doorway of the kitchen. The bustling room fell silent. Cooks and scullions froze, eyes wide, staring at their king standing on the threshold of their domain. It was unheard of. Victor's gaze, however, was only for Alice. He took in the sight of her, the apron tied over her dress, the smudge of white on her cheek, the look of peaceful concentration on her face. A strange, warm feeling bloomed in his chest. He had seen her in fine gowns looking lovely, but here, in her element, she was radiant. He saw not a maid, but a woman of quiet competence and grace, a woman who was not defined by her station, but by the simple, honest work of her hands. He walked toward her, his boots silent on the stone floor. The kitchen staff seemed to hold a collective breath. Alice felt a blush rise to her cheeks, suddenly conscious of her messy appearance. "Your Majesty," she stammered, starting to wipe her hands on her apron. "Victor," he corrected her gently. He stopped beside the table, his eyes twinkling with an emotion she had never seen in them before. Amusement. "I see you have found your way back to your true kingdom." Alice's blush deepened. I was just helping Elspeth." "I can see that," he said, his smile growing wider. He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate. Alice's breath caught in her throat, thinking he was going to take her hand. Instead, his thumb brushed gently against her cheek, wiping away the smudge of flour. His touch was feather light, but it sent a cascade of fire through her veins. The gesture was so intimate, so unexpectedly tender, that she forgot where they were. She forgot the dozens of watching eyes. All she could feel was the gentle rasp of his thumb against her skin, the warmth in his dark eyes. "You had a little something?" "Here," he murmured, his voice low. A nervous laugh escaped her lips. It was a real, genuine sound of delight, bubbling up from a place of pure, unthinking happiness. "So you're the king," she quipped, her shyness momentarily forgotten. "But I am the one with the flower-dusted crown." Victor stared at her for a moment, and then he did something that silenced the entire castle more effectively than any royal decree. He laughed. It was not the polite, restrained chuckle of a monarch. It was a deep, rich, unrestrained sound of pure joy that echoed through the high-ceilinged kitchen. It was the laugh of a man who had forgotten how, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. The cooks and scullions exchanged stunned glances. No one had ever heard the king laugh like that. The sound wrapped around Alice's heart, a warm and wonderful embrace. In that moment, she felt a powerful, undeniable shift inside her. She had made the lonely king laugh. She had brought a moment of unguarded joy to this man who carried the weight of centuries on his shoulders. The lingering fear she had felt, the sense of being an imposter in this grand world, began to recede, replaced by a fierce, protective affection. She wanted to make him laugh like that every day. He was still smiling when his laughter subsided, his eyes shining with a warmth that seemed to light him from within. "A flower-dusted crown," he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "I think it is the finest kind." The moment was broken by a sharp cough from the doorway. Lord Valerius stood there, his face a thunderous mask of disapproval. He had clearly followed the king. His lip curled in a sneer as he took in the scene. The king, in the kitchens, smiling at a flower-covered servant girl. "Your Majesty," Valerius said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I am certain you have more important matters of state to attend to than fraternizing with the staff." The warmth in Victor's eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He turned slowly to face the nobleman, his posture radiating an authority that was absolute and terrifying. "Lord Valerius," Victor said, his voice dangerously soft, "you forget yourself. You are not speaking to a member of the staff. You are speaking of the future queen of Eldoria, and you will afford her the respect she is due." He took a step closer to Alice, a subtle, protective movement that placed him between her and the glowering lord. "Her name," he added, his voice like chipping ice, "is Alice. I suggest you remember it." Valerius paled, his blustering arrogance deflating under the king's quiet fury. He bowed stiffly, his eyes darting from Victor to Alice with a look of pure hatred, before turning on his heel and stalking away. The tension in the kitchen slowly dissipated. Alice looked at Victor, her heart pounding. He had not just defended her, he had claimed her, publicly and unequivocally. He had stood before one of the most powerful men in the kingdom and declared her his equal. He turned back to her, the coldness in his eyes melting away, replaced by a look of concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. Alice could only nod, her throat tight with emotion. She was more than all right. In that moment, standing in the warm, flower-dusted kitchen, she had never felt safer, more cherished, in her entire life. She looked at Victor, at this powerful, ancient being who had knelt for her, who laughed at her silly jokes, and who defended her honor with a quiet ferocity that took her breath away. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was falling in love with him. The confrontation with Lord Valerius was a turning point, but Victor knew it was not enough to ensure Alice's safety. That evening, he convened an emergency session of his Privy Council in the cold, echoing chamber of the throne room. The nobles filed in, whispering among themselves, Lord Valerius among them, his face still flushed with humiliation. Victor did not sit on his throne. He stood before it, his presence commanding absolute silence. Lord Valerius, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. Your conduct today was an insult to your king and to your future queen. You have demonstrated that your loyalty to this crown is conditional at best, treasonous at worst. Valerius sputtered, Your Majesty, you only meant to undermine the woman I have chosen. Victor cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. Your judgment is clouded by pride and outdated notions of bloodline. Therefore, effective immediately, you are relieved of your position on this council. You will retire to oversee our northern mining operations indefinitely. Your presence at court is no longer required. A shocked gasp rippled through the assembled nobles. Valerius's face turned purple with rage, but one look at Victor's implacable expression told him that protest was futile. He bowed stiffly and left the chamber, his footsteps echoing his retreat. Victor turned his gaze to the remaining council members, his eyes sweeping over each face. Let Lord Valerius serve as an example. I have chosen Alice not out of obligation to a magical sword, but because she possesses the qualities this kingdom needs: wisdom, compassion, and a practical understanding of the lives of all our people, not just the nobility. Any who question her fitness for the throne question my judgment. Any who threaten her safety threaten me. Does anyone else wish to voice their concerns? The silence was absolute. Even Lady Seraphina, ever the pragmatist, inclined her head in a gesture of acceptance. She had already chosen her side. Victor continued, his voice firm. I am also restructuring this council. Positions will no longer be hereditary, but earned through merit and service to the realm. I will be seeking advisors from all walks of life, including those who understand trade, agriculture, and the needs of common folk. This kingdom belongs to all who dwell within it, and its governance will reflect that. With Valerius's exile and the council's restructuring, the open hostility toward Alice began to recede, replaced by a wary, grudging acceptance. Victor also assigned two of his most trusted guards, Captain Aldrich and Lieutenant Sarah, to serve as Alice's personal protection. They were discreet but ever present, shadows that ensured her safety as she moved through the castle. Alice protested at first, but Victor was immovable on this point. I will not risk you, he said simply, and she saw the fear beneath his determination, the fear of losing the precious connection he had finally found. More importantly, the incident solidified something within Alice herself. Victor's defense of her had swept away the last vestiges of her feeling like an imposter. He saw her not as a scullery maid he was elevating, but as Alice, the woman he had chosen. His belief in her gave her the strength to believe in herself. Their bond deepened in the days that followed, woven from 1,000 small moments of shared intimacy. They developed their own quiet language of stolen glances across a crowded room, of small smiles that held entire conversations. He would seek her out in the castle library, where she had begun to hesitantly explore the endless shelves under Master Cornelius's tutelage. He found her one afternoon curled in a window seat, a book of poetry resting in her lap, her expression one of rapt concentration. He watched her for a long moment, unseen, his heart swelling with a profound tenderness. She was so earnest in her desire to learn, so open to the world he was showing her. He entered the room, and her head snapped up, a lovely blush staining her cheeks as if he had caught her at some mischief. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly closing the book. "I shouldn't be in here without you." "Nonsense," Victor said, coming to sit on the edge of the window seat beside her. "This is your home now, Alice. Every room in this castle is as much yours as it is mine." He gestured to the book. "What were you reading?" "It's poetry," she said shyly. "About the sea. I've never seen the sea." "It is vast," Victor said, his gaze distant for a moment. "And it sings a song of both creation and destruction. It is wild and beautiful and merciless." He paused, then turned his gaze back to her. "I will take you there one day. We will stand on the cliffs and listen to its song together." The promise hung in the air between them, a simple statement that held the weight of a shared future. Alice's heart gave a hopeful leap. He was not just speaking of today or tomorrow. He was speaking of a one day that stretched out before them. Another evening, she found him in his private study, a room she had been encouraged to enter freely as part of her education. He was bent over a large map spread across his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as she entered, and the lines of worry on his face smoothed out. "Alice," he said, his voice full of relief. "Come in. Perhaps you can help me see what I am missing." She saw that he was planning trade routes, his fingers tracing lines across the parchment. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "A dispute between the northern baronies over lumber rights," he explained, a weary sigh escaping him. "Lord Valerius's cousin and Baron Thornwood are at each other's throats. It is endlessly tedious." He looked at the map with distaste. Centuries of this. Squabbles over land, over money, over pride. Alice came to stand beside him, looking down at the map. She saw the two territories, the river that divided them, and the dense forest that was the source of the conflict. She remembered conversations from the kitchens, gossip from delivery men and traders. "The river floods in the spring, doesn't it?" she asked quietly. "On the Valerius side. The lumbermen there lose weeks of work every year." Victor looked at her, surprised. "Yes, that's true. How did you know that?" "The cooks complain that the price of northern lumber always goes up after the thaw," she said, with a small shrug. "And I heard a trader saying that Baron Thornwood, on the other side of the river, has a new mill that is far more efficient. His production has doubled." A slow smile spread across Victor's face. He looked from Alice to the map, a new light of understanding in his eyes. "So Valerius's cousin is not just angry about the lumber rights," he mused aloud. "He is afraid. His production is falling behind, and he is trying to use an old treaty to bully his way into a better position. The feud is not about principle. It is about economics." Alice hesitated, then ventured further. "What if you offered to help build a levee system on the Valerius side to control the spring floods? The crown funds the infrastructure. Both sides maintain access to the forest, and you negotiate a fair price ceiling for lumber to protect the common people from the price swings. Both barons save face, and the real problem gets solved." Victor stared at her, his expression shifting from surprise to open admiration. I have been listening to my ministers debate the finer points of feudal law for 3 days, and not one of them has offered a piece of insight as practical or as valuable as that. You see the real issue, Alice. You see past the posturing to the actual needs. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. You see things, Alice. You listen. You understand people, not just politics. You will be a better queen than any of them could ever imagine. His praise was like the sun on her face, warm and life-giving. She had offered a simple observation, but he had seen it as a strength. He valued the knowledge she had gleaned from her humble life, seeing it not as a deficit, but as a unique and powerful asset. Her hand tightened in his. "We are a good team," she said softly. "We are," he agreed, his voice husky. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The touch was reverent, a knight's pledge to his lady, the very best. That night, they sat by the fire in the library, the pretense of a meal long forgotten. The air between them was charged with all the things they had not yet said. The courtship had been a gentle, unfolding thing, but it had led them both to the same inescapable conclusion. Victor looked at her, at the way the firelight danced in her hair and brought out the warm gold in her brown eyes. He knew he could not wait any longer to speak what was in his heart. "Alice," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. He set his wine glass aside and turned to face her fully, taking both of her hands in his. "My decree was a desperate act, a foolish hope that I might find a partner, someone to share the burden and the quiet joys of this life. I never dreamed, I never dared to hope it would lead me to you." Alice's heart began to beat a powerful, steady rhythm. This was it. This was the moment all the quiet walks and shared conversations had been leading to. "These past weeks," Victor continued, his gaze intense and unwavering, "have been the happiest of my very long life. You have shown me a world I had forgotten existed, a world of simple kindness, of genuine laughter. You do not look at me and see a king or a monster. You see me, just Victor. And in your eyes, I feel more like myself than I have in centuries." He took a deep breath. The confession laid bare between them. "The decree brought you to me, but the decree is no longer why I want to marry you. I want to marry you, Alice, because I love you. I love your quiet strength, your unexpected wit, and the profound goodness of your heart. I love you." Tears welled in Alice's eyes, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. All the fear, all the uncertainty, all the disbelief she had felt was washed away by the simple, powerful truth of his words. He loved her, not for what she represented, not because of a magical sword, but for who she was. "Oh, Victor," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. He reached up and gently wiped it away with his thumb. I never imagined anyone could see me at all. I was just a shadow in the halls." "You were never a shadow," he said fiercely, his hands tightening around hers. "You were the light I hadn't realized I was searching for." "I love you too," she said, the words feeling as natural on her tongue as breathing. "I think I started falling in love with you when I saw how lonely you were. And every day since, I have fallen a little more." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Victor's face, a smile of such profound relief and happiness that it made him look younger, less burdened. He leaned forward, his forehead coming to rest against hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, their hearts beating in a shared rhythm. The world outside, with its politics and its court, ceased to exist. There was only this room, this fire, and this love, a love that felt both brand new and as ancient as the stars. "Then let us be married," he murmured against her skin. Not a grand state affair for the nobles to whisper over. A small, private wedding for us, for the people who truly matter. And then, if you are willing, a formal state reception the following month for the politics and pageantry. "Yes," Alice whispered back, her eyes closing as she savored the moment. "Just for us first." She knew then that she was not marrying a crown or a castle. She was marrying a man, her Victor, and it was more than she had ever dared to dream of. Their wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn morning. The sky was a crisp, brilliant blue, and the leaves on the ancient oaks in the garden had turned to fiery shades of crimson and gold. As Victor had promised, it was not a grand state affair. There was no procession of nobles, no suffocating crowd in the great hall. The ceremony was to be held in the quiet seclusion of the royal gardens, the same place where they had first walked hand in hand. Victor had, however, been strategic about the event. He had sent word to the noble houses and foreign dignitaries. They could attend his private ceremony if they came with genuine blessing, or they could stay away and send their congratulations. Attending the formal state reception, he would host the following month. Those who came with poisoned hearts or political machinations would be noted and remembered. It was a test of loyalty, and most chose to send expensive gifts and await the later, grander celebration. The guest list for the garden ceremony was small, comprised only of those who had shown them genuine kindness. Cook Elspeth was there, her stern face softened by a watery smile, along with a few of the other kitchen staff who had become Alice's friends. Master Cornelius, the elderly head librarian who had patiently guided Alice through the world of books and history, stood beaming with grandfatherly pride. Lady Seraphina, who had proven her pragmatic loyalty, attended with a respectful nod. A handful of Victor's most loyal and open-minded guard members, including Captain Aldrich and Lieutenant Sarah, formed a respectful perimeter. Nightfall, the sword that had started it all, had been brought from the great hall. It rested on a small, velvet-draped table near the simple wooden archway where they would exchange their vows, its dark steel seeming to drink in the autumn sunlight. Alice dressed not in heavy silks and jewels, but in a simple, elegant gown of deep forest green velvet that matched the color of the moss on the ancient garden walls. Her hair was not twisted into an elaborate courtly style, but fell in soft waves over her shoulders, adorned with a simple circlet of woven ivy and late-blooming white roses. When she looked at her reflection, she did not see a scullery maid or a queen. She saw Alice, a woman who was loved, a woman who was about to marry the man she loved. And she felt beautiful. Victor was waiting for her by the archway. He was dressed in formal black, but he wore no crown. His dark hair was stirred by the gentle breeze, and when he saw her walking toward him down the sun-dappled path, his face lit up with a look of such pure adoration that it took her breath away. He looked at her as if she were the dawn he had been waiting for his entire life. He took her hands as she reached him, his cool fingers lacing through hers. "You are more beautiful than any sunrise, my love," he murmured, his voice for her alone. "And you, Victor," she replied softly, her heart overflowing, "are my home." The ceremony was simple. the words spoken by Master Cornelius, who had been granted the authority to officiate. The vows they exchanged were not the formal, scripted words of a royal wedding, but promises they had written themselves, words that spoke of their unique journey. Victor spoke first, his deep voice resonant with emotion. Alice, I have existed for 1,000 years, but I did not truly live until I met you. You walked into my life by accident and showed me what it means to have a true heart. You brought laughter into my silent halls and light into my lonely soul. I vow to honor you, to cherish you, and to be your partner in all things. I vow to be the man you see, not the king the world sees. I offer you my heart, my life, my eternity. I am yours, completely and forever. Tears streamed freely down Alice's cheeks as she listened. When it was her turn, she took a shaky breath and met his loving gaze. Victor, I came to you with nothing but chapped hands and a fearful heart. You knelt before me and offered me not a crown, but your respect. You listened to my simple stories and made me feel like the most fascinating person in the world. You taught me that my own heart had value. I vow to be your comfort, to share your burdens, and to fill our life with as much joy as I can. I will always see you, my Victor, my love. I give you my heart and my life, for as long as it may last. Master Cornelius smiled gently, his eyes misty. Then by the ancient laws of this kingdom and the witness of your own true hearts, I pronounce you husband and wife. He paused, then added, with a happy twinkle in his eye, You may kiss your bride. Victor turned to her, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. He looked into her eyes, and in their depths, she saw an eternity of love waiting for her. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not a fiery, passionate affair. It was something far deeper, far more profound. It was a kiss of homecoming, of promises sealed, of two souls finally finding their other half. It was gentle and sure, full of all the tenderness and devotion that had grown between them. In that kiss, she felt the loneliness of his centuries melt away, replaced by the warmth of their shared present. In that kiss, he felt the culmination of a hope he had long since abandoned. It was a perfect, beautiful moment. And then, magic answered. A brilliant crimson light erupted from the velvet-draped table. It was not the soft glow of the tournament, but a dazzling, radiant flare. Nightfall pulsed with a light so bright it was like a second sun, bathing the entire garden in its warm, ruby glow. Everyone gasped, shielding their eyes. Victor and Alice broke their kiss, turning in astonishment toward the source of the light. The sword was humming with a powerful, ancient energy, the ruby in its pommel blazing like a star. The light it cast was not just light, it was alive. It swirled around them, a visible manifestation of joy and rightness. It wrapped them in a cocoon of warmth, a silent, powerful affirmation of their union. As they stared, awestruck, a realization dawned on them both, a truth that settled into their hearts with the certainty of a prophecy fulfilled. This was never an accident. Alice's trip, her hand falling on the hilt, it had not been mere chance. The sword had not just been waiting for a true heart, it had been waiting for her heart. It had been waiting for the moment when its king, the lonely man to whom it was bound, would finally find his match. It had sensed her presence in the castle, her quiet kindness, her empathy for the solitary ruler. Her stumble had not been a cause, but a catalyst, an opportunity for the sword to reveal a destiny that was already written. It was a love story, orchestrated by magic itself, a fate woven into the very fabric of the kingdom. The sword was not a test of character. It was a key designed to unlock a door between two hearts that were always meant to find each other. But the magic did not stop at revelation. As the crimson light wrapped around them, Victor and Alice felt a profound change, subtle but unmistakable. The sword's ancient magic was doing more than celebrating their union. It was sealing it in a way that transcended mortal limitations. Alice gasped softly as she felt a warmth spread through her very being, a gentle but undeniable transformation. The magic of nightfall, forged in the heart of a fallen star and bound to the first vampire king, was now binding her life force to Victor's, granting her the gift of his immortality. She would not age and fade while he remained eternal. They would walk through the centuries together, partners in truth for all time. Victor felt it too. The completion of a bond he had not known was possible. His eyes widened with understanding and wonder as he looked at his bride, seeing the subtle shimmer of magic settling into her very essence. "Alice," he breathed, his voice filled with awe. "The sword. It has given us eternity together." Tears of joy streamed down Alice's face as she understood what had happened. The fear she had secretly harbored, the knowledge that her mortal life would be but a brief candle compared to his endless years, was swept away. "Forever," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We have forever." Victor looked from the glowing sword back to his wife, his eyes wide with wonder and a dawning, joyous understanding. He saw it all in a flash. The loneliness of his past, the miracle of her arrival, the certainty of their eternal future. He threw back his head and laughed, the sound full and free, echoing through the enchanted garden. It was the laugh of a man who had just been given the greatest gift in the universe. Alice laughed with him, tears of happiness streaming down her face. She looked at the magical blade, her friend, her matchmaker, her benefactor, and then back at her husband, her Victor. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his heart. "It was always you," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with awe. "From the very beginning, it was always meant to be you. And now, it will always be you, for all of time." "And you," she whispered back, her face buried in his chest, feeling the steady, happy beat of his heart against her cheek. "It was always you, for all of eternity." The crimson light softened, its work now done, and settled back into a gentle, contented glow. Nightfall's purpose had been fulfilled. It had found the true heart meant for its king, united them in love, and blessed them with the time to nurture that love forever. The sword's glow faded to a gentle, steady pulse, and Victor knew that it would remain this way, a guardian and reminder of the love it had orchestrated, to be kept in their private chambers as a symbol of their bond. The autumn sun shone down on the king and his queen, wrapped in each other's arms in the heart of their garden, the magical sword watching over them with its contented crimson glow. Their guests wiped away tears of joy, bearing witness to a love blessed by ancient magic and destined to endure through the ages. Their life together was just beginning, a life that would be filled with laughter and poetry, with wise counsel and quiet evenings by the fire. They would rule Eldoria not just as king and queen, but as partners, as equals, their reign a testament to the transformative power of a love that was, and always had been, pure magic. And unlike the tragic tales of mortals who loved immortals, theirs would be a story of endless tomorrows, of a love that would never know the sorrow of farewell, a love that would grow and deepen with each passing century. The sword had not just given them each other, it had given them forever.